Now listen, because this matters, there comes a point, often after months or even years of psychological confusion and emotional devastation, when you finally begin to realize something profound. You are not crazy. You've been in a psychological war against someone who thrives on manipulation, who distorts reality to maintain control, a narcissist. And if you've ever tangled with one, you know they don't let go easily. But here's the truth. You can win. Not by outplaying their game, but by refusing to play it at all, by reclaiming responsibility for your perceptions, your boundaries, your very identity. That's no small task. It's archetypal. It's the hero's journey through chaos back into order. So today I'm going to walk you through 4 unmistakable signs that you've not only survived, but emerged victorious, that you've taken your power back, and that the narcissist no longer defines the terms of your existence. This isn't just self-help, this is psychological sovereignty. You no longer seek their validation. That statement might sound simple, but in practice, it signifies a monumental psychological shift, perhaps the most critical moment in your recovery from narcissistic abuse. Because the narcissist's control is rooted in your dependence on their approval. From the very beginning, they condition you to seek their praise, to fear their disappointment, to internalize their opinions as truth. You start living in their emotional weather system, where their moods determine your worth and their reactions dictate your choices. It's subtle at first. Maybe they compliment you, then withdraw affection. Maybe they criticize, but follow it with a breadcrumb of praise. You learn quickly that you need to earn their kindness, and that keeps you spinning, working harder, trying to please, terrified of rejection. This is the narcissist's game. It's not just about controlling your behavior, it's about colonizing your identity. They make themselves the authority on your value. You look to them not just for love, but for proof that you deserve to exist as you are. That kind of dependence creates an invisible leash, one they yank whenever they feel threatened by your independence, your clarity, or your strength. It's a slow erasure of self. And what's insidious is that over time you start policing yourself. You modify your voice, your clothing, your opinions. You rehearse conversations in your head to make sure you won't provoke a reaction. You begin to disappear so that they don't feel insecure. But something shifts when you begin to wake up to the game. The first crack often comes in the form of exhaustion, emotional burnout from the endless performance. Or maybe it's a moment when they rage over something trivial, and instead of panicking, you feel bored, disconnected. You stop reacting the way you used to. That's the beginning of detachment. And detachment is power. Because once you stop seeking their validation, they lose their grip. Their criticisms stop landing. Their praise becomes irrelevant. You no longer feel the compulsive need to explain yourself, to justify your choices, to prove that you're good. You already know. This shift isn't about arrogance or defiance. It's about groundedness. You're no longer outsourcing your identity to someone who twists it to serve their ego. You've begun to build an internal compass, something rooted in truth, not approval. And let's be clear, this doesn't mean you no longer care about relationships or feedback. It means you've stopped allowing one distorted voice to override your inner knowing. You start to evaluate their comments, not absorb them automatically. You ask, is this true? Is this fair? Do I believe this? If the answer is no, you let it go. That's a massive psychological breakthrough. And the narcissist senses it often before you do. Suddenly, their tactics stop working. They may lash out, escalate, or play the victim. They'll try everything to get you back into that familiar role. The eager to please, always apologizing, approval-seeking version of yourself. But you don't play along. You don't rise to the bait. You might feel anger, grief, even guilt, but those emotions no longer derail you. They pass through you instead of controlling you. That's because your center of gravity has shifted. You're not performing for them anymore. You're standing in yourself. And the irony is, the more indifferent you become to their validation, the more desperate they become to reclaim their power. But it's too late. You've crossed a threshold. You've started to recognize that your worth is not something to be granted or revoked by anyone else, especially not someone who used your need for love as a tool of control. You enforce boundaries without guilt. For many who've been entangled with a narcissist, the very idea of setting a boundary feels foreign, if not dangerous, because for so long you were trained, sometimes explicitly but often subtly, to believe that your needs were selfish, your limits were unreasonable, and your discomfort was a sign of weakness. Every time you tried to assert yourself, it was met with punishment, silent treatment, gaslighting, mockery, or rage. The narcissist couldn't tolerate your autonomy because your boundaries exposed the truth, that they weren't entitled to everything they demanded. And so you learned to over-explain, to apologize for saying no, to soften every limit until it wasn't a limit at all. You became hyper-attuned to their moods, anticipating their reactions so you could avoid the fallout. Over time, you stopped trusting your instincts. You questioned whether you were being too much or not enough. You let things slide, not because they were acceptable, but because standing your ground always seemed to cost more than it was worth. But beneath the compliance was a building resentment, a quiet, gnawing feeling that your soul was being traded for peace that never came. Recovery begins the moment you realize that a boundary is not a punishment, it is not cruelty, it is not an act of aggression. It is a declaration, this is who I am, and this is what I will and will not accept. Enforcing it is not about controlling others, it's about controlling yourself. It's about deciding where you end and they begin. And in the case of the narcissist, that distinction is everything because their entire strategy depends on the erasure of that line. At first, the guilt will be overwhelming. You'll feel selfish for saying no. You'll worry you're overreacting or being unfair. That guilt isn't proof that you're wrong. It's evidence that you were conditioned to associate self-respect with harm. The narcissist taught you that boundaries were rejection and rejection was cruelty. But as you begin to challenge that lie, something else begins to grow. Clarity. You start noticing how often your time, your energy, your emotional labor have been consumed without consent. You see how your empathy was weaponized, how your silence was mistaken for agreement, and in that clarity, the guilt begins to weaken. You start small. You say no without explaining yourself. You ignore the bait in a provocative message. You end a phone call when the conversation turns abusive. And when the backlash comes, and it will, you hold the line. Not because it feels good in the moment, but because you've finally decided that your peace is not up for negotiation. Each time you stand firm, you rewrite the script. You begin to show yourself that discomfort does not mean danger, that conflict is not always collapse, that other people's reactions are not your responsibility. There's a power in that, a quiet, steady strength that doesn't need to announce itself. You begin to walk through the world differently. You don't flinch when someone pushes. You don't shrink when someone disapproves. You assess situations not through the lens of, will they be upset, but does this align with who I am? That shift is seismic. It means the narcissist can no longer use guilt or obligation to pull you back into the dynamic. They can throw their tantrums, play the victim, accuse you of being cold or cruel, but it doesn't land the same way anymore. You can observe it without absorbing it. Because now you recognize that boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are gates to protect what matters inside. And your job isn't to convince the narcissist to honor them, it's to honor them yourself. Even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when no one claps for you. Their manipulation no longer affects your reality. That's not just a milestone, it's a quiet revolution inside you. Because when you're under the influence of a narcissist, your perception of truth becomes a battlefield. They don't just lie to you. They make you doubt your own eyes, your own feelings, your own memory. They rewrite events in real time. They'll say things didn't happen when you know they did. They'll tell you you're overreacting, too sensitive, imagining things. Over time, you don't just question them, you question yourself. And that is exactly the goal, to make you so unsure of your own mind that you turn to them for clarity. It's not love. It's control. This is the heart of gaslighting, and for anyone who's been subjected to it, the damage runs deep. You stop trusting your instincts, you second guess your emotions, you begin to narrate your life through their perspective, one in which you are always the problem and they are always the misunderstood victim or justified aggressor. You start filtering every decision, every feeling through an internalized version of their voice. You look back at arguments and wonder if you really were being dramatic. You hear their criticisms long after they've left the room. That's not just manipulation, it's psychological colonization. But something changes when you begin to take your reality back. At first, it doesn't feel like strength. It feels like confusion. You'll say to yourself, wait, no, I remember that happening. You'll catch yourself rereading texts or replaying conversations, trying to find your footing. That's not weakness, that's awakening. Slowly, you stop bending your perception to fit their narrative. You start to trust the tension in your gut, the constriction in your chest, the quiet voice that says, this doesn't feel right. That voice had been there all along. It was just buried under the noise of their distortions. As your confidence grows, you stop explaining your reality to them. You stop defending yourself against accusations that don't make sense. You realize that some arguments are not about truth, they're about power. And the moment you understand that, you stop participating in battles you were never meant to win. You start to conserve your energy for clarity, not chaos. You learn to say, that's not how I see it, and let the silence do the rest. You realize that you don't need to convince them. You need to be at peace with yourself. That's where the real power is, not in proving the narcissist wrong, but in no longer needing to. Their disapproval doesn't destabilize you. Their lies don't unseat your truth. Their attempts to bait you, guilt you, or confuse you fall flat. Not because they've changed, but because you have. You've stepped outside the game. You've built a mental boundary around your reality, and inside that space, your thoughts are your own again. You begin to reclaim the most sacred territory you have, your mind. It's not that you become immune to emotion. You may still feel anger, sadness, even fear. But those emotions are no longer directives. They're signals. You don't panic when you're misunderstood. You don't crumble under their accusations. You stand rooted in your own understanding. You check the facts, trust your memory, and if needed, you walk away. You don't engage just to be heard by someone committed to not listening. That's a major transformation. It's a return to self-trust, which is something the narcissist tried to destroy. Because self-trust makes you impossible to control. And once you know what it feels like to live in your own reality again, you guard it fiercely. You stop granting access to those who twist the truth. You stop negotiating with those who weaponize confusion. You live in clarity now, and clarity is freedom. You speak the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. That's not a small step. That's a radical act of self-liberation, especially after being enmeshed with someone who punished you for your honesty. Narcissists don't want the truth. They want agreement, obedience, and silence. They don't ask you how you feel so they can understand you. They ask so they can weaponize it later. Over time, you learn to edit yourself in their presence. You suppress your thoughts, hide your emotions, and package your words in ways that won't trigger their rage or mockery. Eventually, you begin to confuse silence with safety. But silence comes with a price. The more you swallow your truth, the further you drift from yourself. You start to lose track of what you really think, what you really believe, what you even want. Your voice becomes a stranger to you, and when you do speak up, you flinch, bracing for impact, expecting punishment, rehearsing an apology before you've even finished the sentence. That's not communication, that's survival. And the longer you live in that mode, the harder it becomes to tell the difference between peace and suppression. Taking your power back means breaking that pattern, slowly, intentionally, and with courage. It means saying the thing you used to keep inside. It means telling the truth even when it might upset someone, even when it risks conflict, even when it makes your voice tremble. Because now you understand something vital. Your truth is not a threat. It's not an inconvenience. It's not too much. It's your compass, and without it, you're lost, no matter how peaceful things appear on the surface. Speaking the truth doesn't mean attacking. It doesn't mean being harsh or confrontational. It means being clear. It means saying, that hurt me, or I disagree, or that's not acceptable. It means naming what happened without minimizing or sugarcoating. It means not letting someone else's discomfort silence you. And it often starts in small ways. Correcting a lie, setting the record straight, saying no when you would have said yes out of fear. These may seem like tiny acts, but they're actually the foundation of a new identity, one rooted in integrity. The narcissist will notice the shift, and they won't like it. Because your silence used to protect their control. Your compliance made their world stable. But when you start speaking truthfully, you disrupt that balance. You expose their distortions. You refuse to participate in their narratives, and that makes you dangerous to their illusion, not to their safety. So they may escalate, attempt to discredit you, call you bitter, dramatic, or cruel. They'll say, you've changed. And they'll be right. You have. You've stopped lying to keep the peace. You've stopped abandoning yourself to avoid their anger. At some point, you realize that the truth is not about them at all. It's not about convincing them or getting them to understand. It's about alignment. It's about living in a way that's congruent with who you are, no longer split between what you feel and what you express. And the more you do it, the stronger you become. You learn that not everyone has to agree with you. Not everyone has to like what you say. You don't owe comfort to people who thrive on your silence. You owe yourself honesty. And honesty builds confidence. Each time you speak up, you send a message to yourself. I can handle the consequences of being real. That's a deep kind of safety, one no narcissist can offer, and one they always fear. Because someone who speaks the truth without fear is someone who cannot be controlled. You prioritize order over chaos in your inner life. This may seem abstract at first, but in the context of recovery from narcissistic abuse, it becomes a deeply practical and transformative principle. When you are entangled with a narcissist, chaos becomes the default. Not necessarily the loud, obvious kind, but the quiet erosion of clarity, consistency, and peace. Your emotions are constantly in flux. You never know where you stand, what's real, or how they'll react next. Your internal world becomes as unpredictable as the external one they manufacture. That's not a coincidence, it's by design. Narcissists thrive in psychological disorder because it keeps you disoriented and dependent on them for structure. When you're in that environment long enough, you start internalizing the chaos. You become reactive instead of reflective. Your nervous system is in a near constant state of hypervigilance. You may become addicted to the emotional roller coaster, conflict followed by reconciliation, devaluation followed by crumbs of affection. That instability becomes familiar even when it's painful, and somewhere along the way you forget what calm feels like. You forget that peace is not boring, it's necessary. You start to confuse unpredictability with passion and anxiety with connection. But healing requires a complete reorientation. It demands that you stop chasing external validation and start cultivating internal structure. That means you begin to value consistency over drama, clarity over confusion, and solitude over chaos disguised as love. You begin to design your life around what nourishes you instead of what entertains or distracts you. This is the work of rebuilding your inner world, and it starts with very small but profound changes. You create routines, not rigid schedules, but meaningful rhythms that help anchor you in the present. You develop habits that reduce stress rather than provoke it. You make space for reflection, for stillness, for quiet thought. That might mean journaling your feelings instead of suppressing them. It might mean going for a walk instead of engaging in an argument. It might mean choosing a few deep, safe relationships over a crowd of unpredictable ones. These changes seem small, but they are acts of profound defiance against the chaos you were taught to normalize. You also start becoming intentional about what and who you allow into your life. You begin to notice how certain people make you feel ungrounded, anxious, or self-doubting, and you take action, not necessarily through confrontation, but through quiet distancing, through limits, through discernment. You start guarding your peace like it's sacred, because it is. And with that, your identity begins to shift. You're no longer someone who tolerates disorder for the sake of attachment. You're someone who cultivates order as an act of self-respect. And this doesn't mean your life becomes sterile or controlled. It means that your internal compass is no longer thrown off by the moods, projections, or manipulations of someone else. You can feel deeply without losing your center. You can face challenges without spiraling into self-doubt. You have a baseline of stability that doesn't vanish the moment someone tries to provoke you. That's what order gives you. Resilient structure. Space to breathe and think clearly. And when the narcissist or anyone like them tries to pull you back into the chaos, you can feel it immediately. It feels like a return to disorder, to self-abandonment, to emotional noise. But now, instead of getting swept up in it, you pause, you observe, and you choose differently because you've experienced something better. You've tasted what it's like to have a calm mind, a clear heart, and a stable path forward. And that becomes your new standard. You've reclaimed the narrative of your own story. That's not just poetic language. It's a concrete psychological turning point in your healing. When you're under the influence of a narcissist, one of the first things they try to take from you is your narrative. They rewrite the past, distort the present, and dictate how you're supposed to interpret both. They'll tell you what kind of person you are, usually in terms that diminish you. You're too emotional, too difficult, too selfish, too needy. If you ever try to assert your own version of events, they'll shut it down, call you a liar, accuse you of playing the victim. Over time, their voice starts to replace your own. You stop telling your story from your perspective, you start telling it from theirs. That's not just manipulation, that's a theft of identity. You become a supporting character in a script you didn't write, reacting to cues you didn't create. Your experiences get filtered through their interpretations. And even when you're alone, you may find yourself narrating your life as though they're still in the room, still judging, still directing the emotional tone. You remember moments not as they were, but as they said they were. The most painful part, you begin to doubt yourself. You don't trust your memories. You don't trust your gut. You begin to feel like maybe they were right all along. But then something begins to shift. Maybe it starts with writing something down that you never said aloud. Maybe it's telling your story to a therapist or a friend and hearing your own voice without interruption. Maybe it's reading someone else's story and recognizing your own in it. That's how the reclaiming begins, tentatively, quietly, but with increasing strength. You start to go back through your memories. Not to relive the pain, but to reclaim the truth. You stop asking, did I make it worse? And start asking, what actually happened? And what you find might shock you. Not just the severity of what you endured, but the strength it took to survive it. You begin to see yourself not as weak or overreactive, but as someone who adapted under enormous psychological pressure. You reframe the moments you used to feel ashamed of. That time you cried, that was your body pleading for relief. That time you yelled, that was the voice of someone who hadn't been heard in too long. That time you finally walked away, that was the climax of a long, slow rise towards self-respect. Reclaiming your narrative also means revisiting who you were before the narcissist. That version of you wasn't broken, just vulnerable, open, maybe naive, but also hopeful, kind, trusting. Those aren't flaws, they're qualities that someone exploited, but they don't have to be erased. You don't have to become cold or guarded to be safe. You just have to be sovereign. And sovereignty begins with authorship, with choosing how your story is told, who gets to speak into it, and which voices no longer belong there. There's deep healing in that. You may still carry scars, but they become part of a story you own, not one you're stuck in. You can say, this is what happened to me without shame. You can say, this is who I was, this is who I became, and this is who I am now. That kind of clarity makes you unrecognizable to the narcissist because they can no longer use confusion to control you. They can no longer twist your past to make you question your present. And as your story unfolds on your own terms, you stop living in reaction. You start living with intention. You make decisions not to survive, but to build. You tell the truth not to be believed, but to be free. And in doing so, you become something the narcissist never expected, the author of your life.